This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello and welcome to the Rich Dad Radio Show. This is Kim Kiyosaki. We're talking about the good news and the bad news about money. Robert today is wandering the globe, so I'll be hosting the show. And we have an exciting show for you today because we're going to be talking about what the number one skill you need to succeed in business, to excel at what you do, at your job. The vital skill, this vital skill, it affects sales, it affects marketing, it affects employees, your coworkers, your boss, it affects your customers. It also maybe affects your cash flow, and it could also possibly, if it's so important for business and your work, it could also possibly affect your personal relationships. And that skill is a conversation. Now, we've all talked about conversations. We all have an idea of what a conversation is, but we're going to turn the word conversation kind of on its head today because we have a very, very special guest, and she has a lot of conversations, but they're not necessarily the kind you and I have. For example, have you ever talked to somebody and thought, oh, I'm not going to bring up that subject? Or have you ever had a conversation and said, oh, maybe just a little white lie because I don't want to cause an upset. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to have a conflict. And so a lot of times we hide what we really want to say, or we hide the truth. So today's guest, my very special guest, her name is Susan Scott. She's the best-selling author and leadership development expert, the CEO and founder of a company called Fierce Inc. And she even has a story about that name, and we'll get to that too. She is the author of Fierce Conversations, Achieving Success at Work and in Life, One Conversation at a Time, and also the author of Fierce Leadership, A Bold Alternative to the Worst, Best Practices of Business Today. And when we talk about conversations, I just want to read this one thing that Susan says. She says, the conversation is the relationship. While no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a company, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. So do you think this is an important topic? You bet it is. So Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Wonderful books, both of these books. I've been going through them, and some unbelievable stories. I love you. I love your storytelling. And I love your whole premise. So what is Fierce Conversations? What is a fierce conversation?
Well, the simplest definition is a conversation in which we come out from behind ourselves into our conversations and make them real. And while many people are a little anxious about real, it's the unreal conversations that ought to scare us to death because they're very expensive.
So what do you mean when you say come out from behind yourself? What does that mean?
Well, so many times we project images that we imagine other people desire of us. Here comes my boss. Let me put on my boss image. Here comes my colleague or my client. Here comes a family member. Here comes my pastor or my rabbi or whatever. And we try to project the images that we imagine others desire, and we try to say what we think they really want to hear from us. And one woman in a workshop years ago said, I did that forever and ever, and I awoke one morning unrecognizable to myself. And I've never forgotten that because I think it's very easy to try to please everybody and in the process lose little bits of ourselves. And I apologize for my voice today. It's a little bit weak. But I read recently someone was saying, I can't tell you what the secret of success is, but I can sure tell you what the secret of failure is. Try to please everybody.
Yeah. And
so, real, it's just setting aside, which is almost impossible for some people to do, setting aside your quite understandable need to be liked and approved of for the sake of being completely open and honest and authentic.
So this goes on a lot with employees. A lot with employees. For example, I was just reading a story the other day, and there was a leading high-tech company, an employee at this leading high-tech company, and the comment was overheard that if I tell the director of this company what customers are saying, my career will be shot. How often does that go on?
I think it goes on more often than anybody wants to admit, last I heard, telling the truth was not a crime, but in some companies it is considered a misdemeanor. and people are understandably afraid of speaking truth to power, because the last time they saw somebody do that, that person quickly exited the company, and there are prices that we pay. And then that would tell us that we've got leaders who are have integrity issues, and we've got a culture that's not very healthy. But I have found that one person, just one person in a company, does not even have to be somebody with an impressive title. Could be the newest person who just joined the team. One person who will say something like, in a meeting, I've heard what you are proposing, and I absolutely believe that you want to get it right for all of us, for the company. And I have a different perspective that might be useful. May I share it with you? And puts that out on the table. Meanwhile, people around them are holding their breath because they were thinking that, but just didn't have the guts to say anything.
So a fierce conversation basically is telling the truth.
That's telling the truth. But the thing is, here's the thing. The truth, what is the truth? Who owns the truth?
That's a good question.
Nobody.
That's a very good. Everybody has their own truth.
Exactly, and everybody owns a piece of the truth. I mean, we have an analogy when we're teaching people how to have terrific meetings that turn a group of people into an amazing think tank. We have an analogy of a beach ball, and you think of a beach ball that has all these different colored stripes, and everybody in the organization is standing on a different colored stripe on the corporate beach ball and is experiencing the company from that perspective. So if you say, hey, we're blue and therefore we need to do this, meanwhile I'm standing on the opposite side of the beach ball, I can't even see blue from where I'm standing. I'm up to my ears in red, and I want to put this red stuff on the table, and you don't know what I'm talking about. And meanwhile, somebody over here is dealing with yellow, and somebody over here is dealing with green. And when you ask, well, who owns the truth about what color our company is, everybody owns a piece of the truth, and no one person, not even the CEO, because nobody can be in all places at all times. No one person owns the entire truth. So
what do you
one
do?
Of the objectives,
so what do you do?
One of the objectives of a fierce conversation is to interrogate reality. And we have to understand, A, no plan survives its collision with reality, and reality has a habit of changing, which can seriously complicate our fantasies about how things are going to go. And B, there are multiple competing realities existing simultaneously on just about any topic under the sun.
So you're talking about really being open-minded
well,
to hear other points of view.
Yes, and what I would want a leader to understand is his or her job is not to be right. Their job is to get it right. And to do that, I've got to invite and really sincerely invite competing perspectives and thank people for challenging some of my favorite opinions or beliefs, because in an ideal scenario, our conversations would provoke learning for everybody in the room, everybody involved.
This is a really important thing that you're saying, Susan, because let's look, we've done many shows about topics on student campuses about these safe places, and people want to have their own point of view. There's a pollster, a very well-known pollster named Frank Luntz, and Frank said he does all these focus groups, and he says today people used to debate and we used to have these lively discussions, and he says now today everybody just wants to impose their point of view, and people are getting more and more closed-minded to what's going on out there. So how I mean, your message is so important. How do you break through this whole environment where it's so much more I'm right and you're wrong, and if you disagree with me, you're dead to me?
Well, I think we're operating out of a lot of fear. I mean, I'm not going to get into politics because that would not be a pretty picture right now. But, our
it's kind of the epitome of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah. Our divided nation is a perfect example of I'm right, you're wrong.
Yes.
And it's very hard. It's very, very hard to listen to someone espouse their point of view when you believe down to your very toes that they are not only wrong, they are dead wrong. This is horrible. What can you do? So I think what will really help us all is to say, tell me more, say more about that. Help me understand how you came to that belief. I mean, what is it? And be really asking, because it's not okay to say, well, say more about that with a really sort of a smart-ass attitude and, our arms folded across our chest so the person can tell that we aren't really asking. So we have to really, really ask. And then we have to understand how to make a strong case of our own. We have to say, this is what I believe, and this is why I believe it, and this is what I believe is at stake based on what any of us believe. Bullet, bullet, bullet. We often don't get to the here is what I believe is at stake for us to gain or lose based on the beliefs that we hold. And we can believe anything we want to believe, but we're responsible for what we choose to believe because there are outcomes.
Once again, this is Kim Kiyosaki. I am hosting the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money, while Robert is wandering the globe. And we are talking with Susan Scott. She's a best-selling author and leadership development expert. Her 2 books are Fierce Conversations and Fierce Leadership. And what Susan's really talking about is something that is very, very badly needed here in the U.S. and around the world, which is a fierce conversation, which is simply start telling the truth. And we more and more are getting ourselves basically surrounded with people who just want to agree with us instead of having these lively debates of where growth and where real learning happens. So,
and if I can interject,
yes, go right ahead, Susan.
If I say I really I'm going to tell the truth, I have to understand, and I really should position it. I'm going to tell you what my truth is, because if I say my truth is the capital T truth, and anybody who doesn't agree with me is just flat out wrong, then I'm not going to have a very excited audience. And I wanted to say one other thing, Kim, about what's going on. Well, certainly globally, but also in companies, in families, in communities. I believe that the next frontier for exponential growth, whether it's for an individual or for an organization or for a country or for our planet, lies in the area of human connectivity. And I believe that if you want to be a great leader, you have to gain the capacity to connect with your employees, with your customers at a deep level.
Yes.
Or lower your aim. And that our most valuable currency is not money, is not IQ, is not, the ability to speak in 3-letter acronyms. It's relationship. It's emotional capital. And when I charge into a meeting or into a one-to-one conversation with a I'm right, you're wrong attitude, I'm trashing my relationships. And without relationship, we've got nothing. I mean, we might have a brilliant plan, but if we don't have the relationships with people needed to execute that plan, we've got nothing.
Right.
We're just sitting there with our great plan that we're very right about all by ourselves.
Right. And one other thing that can happen when we don't tell the truth again and again, especially let's say we don't want to speak up to our boss or we don't want to be outstanding, what it does, it also kills our spirits individually. So when we come back, we're going to find out why businesses fail gradually and then suddenly. And we're also going to discuss how you can tell the truth more often, faster, better.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rich Dad Radio Show. If you like what you're hearing, go to iTunes or Android, subscribe to the show, and leave a rating and review to help other financially minded people like you find the Rich Dad Radio Show. Thanks for tuning in and keep on learning.
And now, the Rich Dad Radio Show and the Rich Dad Company voicemail box are proud to present Rich Dad's #1 fans.
Hi, I'm looking to find out just a little more information, maybe to share some information about a mafia operating in Canada called the Thompson Mafia. They're a liberal mafia, but a French mafia. Now, after World War II, what we're seeing here is a Cajun revival. In the old days, the French and Mexicans used to vie with the British for North America, and then they lost for a while, for a big while. Now they're striking back. The Cajuns are making a revival. I hope you have a great day.
Rich Dad's #1 fans.
Every business owner and real estate investor needs asset protection. Entities like LLCs, S or C Corps are vital to protect yourself and your business. Let Corporate Direct guide you through the process of forming a corporation or LLC. Corporate Direct is owned by Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton and is Robert Kiyosaki's choice for corporate formation. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off a formation. Call 800-600-1760. That's 800-600-1760. Or visit online at corporatedirect.com. That's corporatedirect.com.
Your financial education continues. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Hello and welcome back to the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and the bad news about money. This is Kim Kiyosaki, and I'm hosting the program today as Robert is trekking around the world. You can listen to Rich Dad Radio anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android, and we archive all our programs because, as we say at the Rich Dad Company, repetition is how you learn. So listen to these programs again and again because every time you listen to them, you're going to hear something new. And today we're talking about a very important subject. We're talking about, the book is called Fierce Conversations, and we're also going to get to fierce leadership. But it's much more than a conversation, in my opinion. It's really about, the fierce conversation is about telling the truth. And telling the truth in situations where you don't want to tell the truth. You don't want the confrontation. You don't want the upset. You don't want to possibly get fired. You don't want your spouse to walk out on you. Because sometimes what happens, and we're going to talk about this, these things build up. And when you do finally decide, I'm going to tell the truth, it could be a whole bag of worms, a whole can of worms. So today we have the expert, and she's going to tell us how to handle this. Her name is Susan Scott. She is the author of Fierce Conversations, Achieving Success at Work and in Life, One Conversation at a Time, and Fierce Leadership, a bold alternative to the worst, best practices of business today. Susan, there is so much we have to talk about. Let's start with a business. And businesses today, okay, the word I hear all the time, we're so transparent. We're transparent. Everything, we're an open book. And then when you really dig inside, there is no transparency. There is no open book. There is no conversations going on. There's no truth-telling happening. How does, number one, a company who wants to have this environment of telling the truth and having these important conversations and not being a fear-based organization, how does a leader or how does anyone within the company start to make that happen?
That's a great question, Kim. They've got to understand what they're doing, probably unconsciously, that shuts everybody down. So, for example, a leader might say, or anybody who's running a meeting might say, I really want to hear your ideas. I'm open to all ideas, even if, they're different than mine. And it could be very quiet while people try to decide, is this the hill on which I'm prepared to die? But maybe
yeah, they're all sitting there going, I'm not going to raise my hand.
Right. But eventually some brave soul says, well, you asked. And so I'm a little concerned about blah, 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 blah. And the leader, sometimes you can just tell by the expression that comes over their face immediately, where they sort of turn into the Stone Mountain look. Or you can tell that they're gritting their teeth. But when the leader finally says something, what he or she often says is, yes, I hear you, Mike, but. And then, in fact, I just watched the Game of Thrones, the newest program in the new season. And there's a line in there where I think Tyrion or somebody says everything that happens before but is horse.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. And I laughed at that. And we've created a meme to go along with that because it's so hilarious. But
We actually
say,
we actually practice if we're going to say something like that, instead of but, we say da 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 and da 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 da.
Yes,
Because it really does. The but word negates everything. Negates
it
everything.
Absolutely does. What it indicates, as soon as I say, yeah, I hear you, but I'm saying either
No, I don't hear you.
I wasn't really asking,
Yeah.
or apparently you haven't yet grasped the brilliance of my thinking, or you're wrong.
Right. So the leader. So the leader or the head person, or it needs to start there, right? What if, in a lot of cases they don't want that. They want the yes people around them.
Well, if they do, then they can look at the results that their company is producing to see that probably isn't working, because everybody says we need innovation in our company, and yet if people's competing ideas are shut down, then we're not going to get innovation. We're just going to get whatever is the best thinking at the moment of whoever is in charge. And that just, I know from my own personal experience that I would have made many blunders over the 16 years of running Fierce if I hadn't really listened to people on our team and changed course from time to time, because they persuaded me that I was really missing the big picture. I was really missing something important. The thing is, ideally, it would start with the leader. I mean, ideally, the leader would be modeling this transparency that we all say that we want and that scares us half to death. But honestly, it can happen. It can start anywhere. As I said earlier, there's so many times I've seen where one individual can change the whole conversation. Like if you've ever been in a canoe, I practically grew up in a canoe in Tennessee.
Okay.
And let's say you're in a canoe and you learn that if you put your paddle in the water at a certain angle and just hold it there for a minute, the canoe will change direction dramatically. And a comment or a question in a conversation can be exactly like that paddle in the water, saying, I want to make sure that all perspectives are heard here, and I know that's what you want as well, and I have a perspective that may not be welcome, but I think might be useful for this conversation. May I please disclose it or share it with you? When you say something like that, nobody is going to say, well, no, you can't. I mean, they're going to have to give you permission. And then the trick is,
so asking permission is a good
asking permission is good.
tactic.
And then the key is describe reality from your perspective without laying blame. Because as soon as
crucial.
I say, well, what's really going on is that those guys over in manufacturing or those guys in sales or whoever is really messing up here and they're not doing it, as soon as I go down that road, I will not be welcomed at the table.
Well, that's
it's worth the struggle.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I remember when the Steve Jobs book came out and they were talking about his leadership style. And his leadership style is very rough. Matter of fact, I just talked with somebody recently who worked with Steve Jobs, and he said, it was a fear-based, and he just said it like it was, and he didn't care about people's feelings or whatever. He just and for a lot of people that made them better, but the whole environment was one of fear. And so a lot of people read that book going, oh, that's how I have to manage. I have to be brutally honest, which is very different from a fierce conversation.
There's nothing brutal about a fierce conversation.
Yeah.
Fierce conversations, they interrogate reality, they provoke learning, it allows us to tackle our toughest challenges, and they enrich relationships. And if I'm doing 1, 2, and 3, but not 4, if I'm not enriching relationships, then it's not a fierce conversation. It's this brutal honesty thing that has been around forever, that it's not a good idea. But I also want to say, sometimes people will say, well, I don't know if it's safe. I don't know if it's safe. I always say to them, look, you are your own safety net. I mean, you cannot be reliant on somebody else to change the way they behave or think or the look on their face or their body posture or the words that come out of their mouth before you show up. If that is your deal, you'll never show up.
So the first fierce conversation you have to have is with yourself.
Absolutely.
That's number one.
And yes, and I think I want people to understand that in a very real sense, the progress of your company depends on your progress as an individual right now, today, not when the sun, moon, and stars are perfectly aligned and the right music is in the background, not when it's easy, but when it's hard. Because if a problem exists in our company or in our family or wherever, if a problem exists, it exists, whether we talk about it or not. And I love what Carl Jung said. He said, what we do not make conscious emerges later as fate.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Isn't that's fabulous?
Brilliant.
I love that.
Brilliant. Once again, this is Kim Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. We are talking to the wonderful Susan Scott, best-selling author and leadership development expert. She is CEO and founder of Fierce Inc., author of Fierce Conversations and Fierce Leadership. And I think you're touching on the core of this whole thing, Susan, when you say it comes down to the individual. So, for example, and I'm going to say it again because this is in your book, this story about this woman, young woman. She started at work, new job, and she was so excited, and it was a big opportunity. And as soon as she got in there, she found out that her coworkers were like, hey, don't rock the boat. And don't come up with these big ideas and kind of be invisible and be quiet. Right. And so she little by little stopped asking questions. All of a sudden, this job became small. And she said, within a few weeks, I was driving to work. I psyched myself down for a job that was too small for me. Within a month, I had absented my spirit. That's the killer right there.
It is, and that's in Studs Terkel's book called Working. And I'll never forget that. She had absented her spirit from her work, and I think that is what can happen when somebody comes in, especially a relatively young person who comes in with all these hopes and dreams and skills, and they're so eager to make a difference, to make an impact, to be part of the solutions for a company, and they get shot down, and you get the feeling that all that they have to bring to the table is not welcome. Yeah,
so they need to look at themselves and say, am I willing to live this kind of a life for the rest of my life and hide, or am I willing to have these fierce conversations and be true to myself, and for a cliche to say, but basically to live the life that's true to you.
And to have a conversation with whoever it might be in the organization that is trying to shut them down.
And if you pick up, and I would highly recommend Susan's book, Fierce Conversations, you'll hear some of the fierce conversations she's had with some very powerful CEOs, and it'll surprise you. It surprised me on many occasions. So when we come back, there's so much to talk about. We didn't even get to what we were going to talk about. What we were going to talk about is why do businesses and people fail gradually, then suddenly. We're going to get to that. And I also want to touch on, Susan, when we come back, fierce leadership.
Sure.
And who, in your opinion, are fierce leaders and who are not? And how, if you're not a fierce leader, how do you become one?
You're listening to The Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Rich Dad Coaching offers a phenomenal variety of services and custom strategies, all aimed at ensuring a secure, comfortable, and rich future for you and your family. Now you can get weekly access to exclusive Rich Dad coaching services through our live stream events. Go to richdad.com and click on the on-demand banner at the top of the homepage. Great new videos are updated regularly. Get inside knowledge and insights from Robert Kiyosaki himself, Rich Dad coaching professionals, and more. Go to richdad.com and click on the on-demand banner at the top of the homepage.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back to the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and the bad news about money. This is Kim Kiyosaki. Obviously, I am not Robert Kiyosaki, as he is off trekking the globe. And we are doing a wonderful, fun, exhilarating, eye-opening show. And again, you can hear all of these podcasts at Rich Dad Radio. You can listen to Rich Dad Radio anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And again, we encourage you to re-listen to these programs, because you might listen to a program 3 months from now and you're in a whole nother space and you're going to hear something totally different than you listened to it for the first time. Or share it with friends, listen to it with family. It's a great way to learn together. And today we are talking to the brilliant Susan Scott, best-selling author and leadership development expert, CEO and founder of Fierce Inc., the author of Fierce Conversations, Achieving Success at Work and in Life, One Conversation at a Time, and Fierce Leadership, A Bold Alternative to the Worst Best Practices of Business Today. So, Susan, before we go any further, I just need to hear one story. Tell us one story of a fierce conversation you've had with, let's say, some powerful CEO or somebody like that.
I've got a long list of them, but one that I often share with people because it has some humor to it is there was a CEO who really wanted to become a member of one of my CEO think tanks. And so I went to his office to meet with him for the first time and walked in and introduced myself, and he just started talking, and he just talked, and I tried to interject, even a question, but there was no interjecting anything at all. And finally, I kind of waved my hands and said, hang on, stop. I said, the word conversation comes from the Latin conversare. It means an exchange of ideas and sentiments, and it starts with con, which is Spanish for with. And we're not having a conversation. We're having a versation. And he laughed, and he said, yep, my wife says that all the time, and he kept right on talking.
Of course he did.
It just talking, and I finally just stood up and walked to the door of his office, at which point he said, wait a second, where are you going? And I said, I'm leaving. He said, do you remind me of someone from my past who had a style of lovemaking that did not require my presence? He said, what? And I said, look, here's the deal. I don't know that you and I can go anywhere because I think you've got a serious problem with talking so much that you won't let anybody else into the conversation. And I hate to think of what it is like at a meeting here with your executives. I know I myself am personally bored right out of my socks. And I'm going to take a little walk around the building, and then I'll come in and I'll ask you what is the most important thing we should be talking about. And you'll tell me, and then I want us to have an actual conversation. And when I came back and asked him, he said, I want to talk about the fact that I think my wife is about to ask me for a divorce.
Wow.
And I said, okay, let's go there. And we did, and she did. And it was too late to save that marriage, and who could blame her? Really. And the thing is that he was a good person and a very smart person, but he initially would not let anybody else in. He just loved to hold forth.
Yep.
And I think it was partly because his father had founded the company and had retired and turned it over to him, and he felt like he had to prove himself. All this.
Yeah, that
all
makes
those
sense.
Issues. I'm not a shrink, so I don't know for sure, but we finally worked through it.
but and that's a great story. That's a great story, and that's what you do. Those are the fierce conversations you have, and the fact about the divorce goes perfectly into what we wanted to talk about, and that I didn't expect that to happen. But there's a quote you have from Hemingway in your book.
Yes.
What is that quote?
Yeah, I had been running think tanks for CEOs here in Seattle, where I'm based, for 13 years, and I had two groups, a total of 30 non-competing CEOs, and I'd had well over 10,000 hours of conversations with them, either individually or as a group, when I was reading Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, in which a character is in a bar in Spain with a bunch of his friends, and they've all been drinking. And one of his friends asks him, so how did you go bankrupt? And he says, 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And I laughed. And then I had an epiphany, or as my young niece would call them, an apostrophe. I've always liked that idea, this apostrophe, that our careers and our companies and our relationships and indeed our very lives succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. I thought about, on the negative side, how many times had a CEO been saying, how did we lose that major client that counted for a big % of our revenue? One failed or one missing conversation at a time. How did I lose that key employee for whom I had great plans? Same way. How did I lose a marriage I was not prepared to lose? One failed, one missing conversation at a time, on and on and on. On the flip side, how did we gain that customer? How did I retain these great employees? How do I have this terrific marriage? One successful conversation at a time. And so we always wake up when we arrive at a suddenly, whether it's a negative one or a positive one. What we want for our clients is that they're awake during the gradually part,
Yes.
which is 99% of our lives is
Right.
gradually,
Right.
and that we know where we're trending. Are we moving towards the suddenly that we want, or a suddenly that we don't want and are afraid to even talk about?
Well, and I thought about that when you're talking about this gentleman said, my wife wants a divorce. And he sounded,
Yeah.
and if he was surprised, like this came out of the blue, obviously there's been a lot of gradually building up and a lot of non-conversations, I'm guessing, on her part that led to
Right.
the suddenly.
Right. I'm sure that, whenever he was in the room and would just be talking away, her eyes were just rolling back
Yeah.
in her head.
Yep.
And she was,
I've never done that with my husband.
no, never, never.
But that's what happens in business. And I understand what you're saying is that you want people to wake up to the gradually, because you want them to wake up to the conversations they're having now, every single conversation. So the suddenly is more good news than bad.
Absolutely. We're all standing on this board game called our lives, and when we ask ourselves, how did I get here to this particular square on my game board of life with all the results that I currently have, the ones I love and the ones I don't love? Well, I got here one failed conversation at a time, one missing conversation, one successful conversation at a time. And when I think about, okay, here's where I am today, where do I want to be in a year or 3 years or 5 years? How am I going to get there? Same way I got here, one conversation at a time. So it's really important for us to become aware that every conversation that we have, and that would include emails and telephone
Yes.
calls, texts, every single one is either moving me towards what I say I want or flatlining it. So what is the point? Or moving it away.
At our company here, the Rich Dad Company, we've gone through a major transition over the last 8 years or so, and we had a company that was definitely not a fierce conversation type company at all. There was a lot of fear. Everybody was on a need-to-know basis. There was a lot of infighting, gossip. It was horrible. And we had to, as owners of the company, we weren't there on a daily basis, but we were the owners, and we had to look at it and say, okay, this needs to change. This needs to change. So we brought in two people who have just been magnificent, and one specifically who works with the entire staff. And now our company is one where they have those fierce conversations and they have those lively debates, and any idea is up for grabs, and they talk it out and they discuss it. And we do it as a team. We do it as a group. And I give our team a whole lot of credit. But I know exactly what you're saying, from not having the conversations to going to the fierce conversations, and the magnificent difference it makes.
Well, I'm really glad that you guys made that wonderful transition, because now you are enjoying the results.
We are.
There's sort of an energetic flat line in a company where we don't feel like we can show up. But a lot of people think that there will be consequences for them to be real when there won't be. It's just that they were taught all of their lives, don't disclose what you're really thinking and feeling. It's too risky. And they've bought into that belief. And so even if someone really sincere says, tell me what your thoughts are, they're terrified of doing that. And that's just a shame.
Once again, we're talking with Susan Scott, author of Fierce Conversations. Fierce leadership. What is fierce leadership?
Well, I overheard one of our leaders here after she got off the phone talking with a client. She said, oh, my gosh, they've got some of the worst best practices I've ever seen. And I got the idea for my second book. And, for example, the first one is 360 anonymous feedback. I think that's one of the worst so-called best practices ever.
Anonymous feedback.
Oh, anonymous. It's the anonymous part. The 360 part is great.
It sounds like the internet.
Anonymous. Yeah. It's the anonymous part that's horrible. And it's interesting because there has been, since I wrote that book, there's been a huge sea change in the world of performance management, including the dwindling of anonymous feedback and the desire for face-to-face conversations. And so, I've rewritten the book. The rewrite came out in May, and it goes into detail as to why feedback is so valuable, along with how to ask for it, how to give it, and receive it. And that is just one example of a practice that has been rampant, where this anonymous, the ability to give feedback anonymously. Everybody was so proud that they were able to provide that to their employees, and it just always backfired for them. I mean, all people could think about is who thinks that about me and why, because they're wrong. I mean, it just.
So they just got a lot of negative feedback from people.
Oh yeah,
but not
yeah.
necessarily
I mean,
constructive.
You could give someone 5 compliments and 1 negative that's anonymous, and that's where they pitch their tent. That's where they live from that point on.
And isn't that part of what's going on the internet today? Everybody, because they're anonymous, they can say whatever they want to say, and oftentimes it's pretty bad stuff.
Things.
Yeah, they do.
Ugly things.
They do.
Such cowardice and meanness and smallness. Yeah, it's a shame.
So is a fierce leader one who embraces the whole fierce conversations and is open to the truth, open to feedback?
Yeah, I mean, and they're turning away from the old leadership style, and they're moving towards the newer leadership style, which is much more collaborative, much more respectful, very, very open and honest and transparent, and they're looking for, what is the best thing for the company? Not my plan necessarily. Right. I have a plan and I want to run it by my team, and I bet you that in running it by the team, they will make it better.
Who would you say are fierce leaders, or who were fierce leaders and who weren't? Give me just a couple names.
I think Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, is very fierce. And we've done a lot of work within their company. And, I even went over to London to work with their European team of directors who were saying, we've got to talk about our mokitas. And mokita is a term in Fierce Conversations. It's New Guinean term for that which everyone knows and no one speaks of.
I love that.
And they actually had a little blow-up elephant in the room. And they said, we're going to embrace this elephant. We're going to turn it around and look it right in its eye, and we're going to address and resolve all of our mokitas, because if we don't, we will not be able to deliver our goals to the company. But I say Howard Schultz because years ago, when suddenly Starbucks stock took a dive and he came back in, he was completely transparent with everyone, including the stockholders, saying we tried to grow too fast, and here are some things that we did that weren't the smartest moves we could have made. Here's what the plan is to turn things around. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is going to work. And I'm inviting you to send me your ideas. They had a whole area of a website set up for people to send in suggestions, or even to surface issues. And that was a great example of fierce leadership.
Do you have an example of someone who's not a fierce leader?
Well, there've been quite a few in the news.
We're going to keep politics out of it.
Yeah, we're going to keep politics out of it. I'm biting my tongue. But even in a lot of the tech companies where we've had a lot of the sexual misconduct, and people were told don't say anything about this. Don't bring it up, because you won't get an investor, or you won't keep your job, or you'll be demoted, or you'll be whatever. I mean, what a shame. What an interesting culture. And that's just one of many examples. But look at Fox News, look at a lot of the other organizations where
Penn State,
that kind of behavior has been rampant.
Yep. And
people lived with it for decades. And then finally one person says, you know what, enough. I'm gonna call it what it is, and then all of a sudden everybody comes out of the woodwork and says, and me too, and me too, and me too, and me too.
This whole thing about having the fierce conversations, the whole thing about the truth shall set you free, is really what you're saying. Because think of in those instances, these people had to cover up so much, and what that did to their self-esteem, and what that did to their spirit, and what that did to their everything it's a killer. So that's a great, really good example.
It literally is a killer, because it affects our immune system. I mean, it really does. When we're holding all this stuff in, it really does affect our immune system. And that means we're more vulnerable to opportunities to get sick. And so it's a killing thing. It kills the spirit. It can damage the body for us to sort of suck up all this stuff that we see is going on or sense is going on and not say anything about it.
Yeah.
I do want to make one other point, Kim, that's really important. Sometimes people understandably think that a fierce conversation is the one in which I tell you what I think of you and the horse you rode in on.
Yeah.
And it's also, remember, it's about being real. So it's also, let me tell you what it is about you that just knocks the socks off. You know, the way you handled challenges in the meeting, you weren't defensive. You kept saying, "We'll say more about that." You thanked people for challenging your ideas. You were amazing, and I just hope you keep doing that in the organization because that's really important for all of us. That's fierce. Fierce is not just about dealing with issues and dealing with problems. It's also letting people know that you see them, that you value them, that you respect them, that you love them.
Our listeners are always looking for, how do you start? Where do you start? Where do you start to tell the truth? And I just want to read this one question that you put in your book. You say when all the CEOs come together, there's often their conversations often begin with the question, given everything on your plate, what is the most important thing we should be talking about? And that to me says, that's good too for the CEOs, but that's also a question I could ask myself. Given everything on my plate, what's the most important thing I should be talking about to this person or to myself?
Yes, absolutely. And that is how, for years and years and years, I worked with CEOs, and that is the question I began every single meeting with them. But it's also the question that my family members ask. When we get together and we say, is there, what is, given everything that's on everybody's plate, what's the most important thing we as a family should be talking about?
It's a great question.
Yeah, and it's a great question within a team, within a company. It's a fabulous question for a leader to ask his or her team. I've got my agenda here, but I recognize I might not know everything that's going on. So I want to ask you, given everything that's on your plates, what do you feel is the most important thing we should be talking about? And if somebody says, I don't know, then I would want that leader to say, well, what would it be if you did know?
Yes. Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, we are just about out of time. I do have one final question for you, Susan, because I think this is kind of funny. You were you named your company Fierce Inc.
Yes.
And you got some negative feedback about that.
I did. As a matter of fact,
Why?
My publisher really wanted me to change it to Powerful Conversations. And I said, well, that would ensure that nobody would ever look twice at this book.
Yes.
The word fierce the phrase fierce conversations, the first time I heard somebody say it, it really shook me. It woke me up. It got me curious. And so I want people to see that title and to think, well, what is that? And at least turn the book over or look inside if you're on Amazon or wherever you are to see, well, what is this about?
Did it have any?
Did
the pushback come from anything from the fact that you were a woman, and that was a different word for a woman?
I don't think so. I don't think it came from that. It did. It has come from a couple of clients who said, "Well, we can't bring anything in that's called fierce conversations because, it would make everybody really nervous." And then we have to say, wow, you're not holding your employees able to grasp what this is in the first 30 seconds of a conversation. You're treating them as if they're not very bright. And that's a shame because, within the first moment of training, people get, oh my God, I understand what this is and I want more of it in my life.
Yeah,
show me how.
And it stands out, and you stand out. And I really want to thank you for the great work you're doing because, as I said earlier, the world needs these fierce conversations, and the world needs to be more truthful and telling the truth and not all this politically correct. I'm going to go to my safe place, and I only want people that agree with me. So thank you for the work you're doing, Susan. Again, please get her books, Fierce Conversations and Fierce Leadership. Susan, I can't thank you enough. Great program. I'd love to have you on the program again because we just scraped the top of the iceberg on this one.
I know, and I'd love to be on it again. Kim, thank you so much. You're a great host.
Thank you, Susan. And when we come back, we're going to go into Ask Kim.
You're listening to The Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Every business owner and real estate investor needs asset protection. Entities like LLCs, S or C Corps are vital to protect yourself and your business. Let Corporate Direct guide you through the process of forming a corporation or LLC. Corporate Direct is owned by Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton and is Robert Kiyosaki's choice for corporate formation. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off a formation. Call 800-600-1760. That's 800-600-1760. Or visit online at corporatedirect.com. That's corporatedirect.com.
The key to achieving your dreams is to develop a rich mindset instead of an excuse mindset. Instead of saying, I can't afford that, ask yourself, how can I afford that? It's amazing how a simple shift in thinking can open a world of new ideas and endless possibilities. Let the Rich Dad Company help kickstart your journey to financial freedom. Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Company have compiled Robert's top secrets to creating a rich mindset, now available in a 10-minute ebook, How to Achieve a Rich Mindset. This offer is available for a limited time only, so get yours today. Get your free ebook, How to Achieve a Rich Mindset. Go to richdad.com and look for the banner. Again, this is available only for a few days, so act fast. Go to richdad.com and look for the How to Achieve a Rich Mindset banner.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Again, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android, and you can hear podcasts at richdadradio.com. And again, we encourage you to listen to these programs again and again, because that's how we learn. And always there's something new to pick up in every single time I listen to one of our podcasts. I want to thank our great guest, Susan Scott. She's the best-selling author and leadership development expert, CEO and founder of Fierce Inc. And I just want to share two quick things. We talked about at the end of the show, the key question to ask is, given everything on your plate, what is the most important thing we should be talking about today? Whether it's with your family, whether it's with coworkers, whether it's with your executive team, or whether it's a conversation with yourself. And the second thing she said, if you're not sure how to begin having these fierce conversations, she says, begin listening to yourself as you've never listened before. Begin to overhear yourself, avoiding the topic, changing the subject, holding back, telling little lies and big ones, being imprecise in your language, being uninteresting, even to yourself. Not that none of us have ever done that. And the assignment is that at least once today, when something inside you says, this is an opportunity to be fierce, stop for a moment, take a deep breath, then come out from behind yourself into the conversation and make it real. So now we are going into Ask Kim. And if you have any questions, please submit them at richdadradio.com. You can ask Kim, you can ask Robert, you can ask Robert and Kim. Melissa, what's our first question?
Our first question today comes from Audrey in London. Favorite book, Midas Touch. She says, Kim, what do you do when you are in a relationship and only one of you wants to become rich and the other one wants to spend all his money and time on leisure activities and only work 9 to 5?
Well, what is her name?
Audrey.
Audrey, we have a book for you. It's called Fierce Conversations. You got to start the conversation, and I'm really going to recommend this book because this is the exact kind of situation where I bet you haven't, or he hasn't, you haven't sat down and really had these conversations about what you really want and really discussed it. Susan explains in the book how really you do that. How do you go about that? Because I just know for me and Robert, when we have values that are opposite, it can wreak havoc. And we need to figure out how we get on the same page one way or another. Not that we always are going to agree, but if you really have this goal of being wealthy and being successful and he doesn't support that, then the chances of that happening are really slim. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from South Africa, from your fans in South Africa.
I love South Africa. Go Springboks. We love the Springboks rugby.
That's right. Favorite book, Cashflow Quadrant. It says, how do you keep thinking positive things all the time, even when there are obstacles in the way? How do you keep constant focus?
How do you keep positive? I can't say that I've been positive all the time, but I can say this, and this is a principle that Robert and I live by, is when we have a problem, when we have a challenge, when we have screwed up, We might be down for a little bit, but basically we go, okay, what's the lesson to learn? What do we need to learn from this? Because once we learn this lesson, we're going to grow and we're going to be better. So every time there's an obstacle in our way or a challenge or a problem, we just look at it as this is going to make us better. So you got to deal with it. You got to handle it. But most importantly, you need to look for the lesson within the problem, because every single problem has a lesson. Every single problem has a clue. And the clue is to guide you to be better than you are today. So look for the clues. The clues are all around you. They don't even have to be in challenges and upsets. They can just be something pops into your world and you go, I need to pay attention. So how do you stay focused? Start paying attention, being aware of pay attention and be present. The more present you are, the more successful you're going to be. So again, thank you for listening. Again, I want to thank our guest, Susan Scott, Fierce Conversations and Fierce Leadership. Again, get those books. And if you have questions, please submit them to richdadradio.com. Thank you all for listening, and may we all go out there and have those fierce conversations we need to have. Thank you.